Welcome back to PolicyCast. Today, we're joined by Meenakshi Sharma, partner at Grant Thornton Bharat, to discuss the regulatory and process framework around SEBI's Prohibition of Insider Trading Regulations 2015, going beyond the rulebook to what companies must do to stay ahead. With headline cases, expanded interpretations of unpublished price-sensitive information, or UPSI, and heightened regulatory scrutiny, boards and compliance teams can no longer rely on old playbooks. In this episode, we unpack the evolving risks, share practical compliance strategies, and explore how India's insider trading regime is shifting from enforcement-driven penalties to proactive prevention. So let's get right into it. Meenakshi, my first question to you is, what are the biggest blind spots in UPSI identification?
Thanks, Simran, for having me here and for picking up a very, very relevant topic, I must say. UPSI, or PIT as we call it, unpublished price-sensitive information and prevention or prohibition of insider trading. I think they're making quite a few headlines in the last few months. But if I may say, I think the regulator has been on the top of it, and there's a very strategic lens that the regulator has been applying to PIT and UPSI. And I think from 2015 and then 2019 onwards, we've seen a lot of regulatory changes happening in this space, where the regulator has tried to kind of broaden the UPSI definition also, as we see in the last few months that has happened in the last year as well. But what needs to be done by corporates and by compliance officers and boards, more specifically and strategically, is to kind of look through the lens of UPSI, not only from a regulatory or a legal angle, but from a process perspective. So here, I think you need to go beyond the law and look at the spirit of law rather than just complying with the letter itself. And UPSI identification has to happen right there when you feel that something any corporate action or any action that is happening may kind of translate into a price sensitive information. That point is where UPSI needs to be identified. So it has to be an ever evolving process. It cannot be just a list which people abide by. But I think as a corporate kind of advances in its journey, this has to be a process which is ongoing for UPSIs to be identified.
Thanks. That takes me to the next question. How do cultural attitudes undermine compliance?
That's an excellent question, Simran, I must say. We are, bound by the way we work, and there's an inertia to change. Typically, I have seen a lot of this with IPOing companies, which are like companies which are getting into an IPO, or just after that when they become listed companies, because that is the time when the cultural mindset shift has to take a leap, right? Has to take a very large leap, where the cultural mindset will have to change from everything can be spoken or everything can be shared to kind of curtailing that to, only those who are required to know this information kind of a mindset. Also, I think the tone at the top will have to be set by the guardians, that's our boards, for zero tolerance on any non-compliance with PIT or UPSI. That has to come in. So I think there is a behavioral and there's a mindset shift which needs to happen specifically in these companies. I do not say that all the listed companies are doing fantastic. There also, I think this cultural change needs to kind of get to the bottom of it. But yeah, we've seen most of the challenges coming in with the companies who are getting listed.
Sure. Are companies underestimating the risk of UPSI leaks through digital channels for information exchange and personal email?
We cannot exactly talk about the formal, the informal powers with the regulator, etc. But you'd remember that there was those famous WhatsApp leaked cases which happened around 9-10 years back, and then the whole regulation was kind of changed, and AI is being used by the regulator now to kind of do this. But there are digital channels through which, some of them you mentioned, through which UPSI information gets moves from here to the other place. I think there needs to be a stricter process in place, and people really need to understand that everything which is sensitive, which is data heavy, and which which can kind of cause movements in the securities prices when it becomes public. Those checks and balances will have to be placed on what could be those digital channels on which information exchange, etc., could happen. So I think there the boards need to spend some time along with the compliance teams.
Thanks, Meenakshi. That takes me to the next question. What practical steps can prevent UPSI leaks during investor roadshows and pre-IPO marketing?
These investor roadshows and pre-IPO marketing, wherein we kind of the companies interact with investors and capital market participants for that matter. They're very fertile ground for any unguarded disclosures that can happen, right? Earnings conference calls, etc. There are live Q&A which is happening. People can get carried away, etc. I think here, and we've seen that the regulators' enforcement has taken actions where premature disclosures of this kind at such events have taken place before or ahead of formal announcements. What should be done is the investor relations officers, IROs, and his or her team should kind of prep the speaking council, as we say. Firstly, only a few people should be authorized to talk to analyst investors and capital market participants. Not everybody should do that. They should be trained on how this conversation, what are the guardrails that should be there for these conversations to happen. And there should be clear speaking notes on what has to be said, etc. And someone from the IR team needs to be around for these roadshow sessions, etc. And the transcripts and any presentation made, etc. should be captured. And there are the laws also from the LODR around these conversations and meetings. But I think all this kind of a precautionary work should be handled, and then people should be made aware. I think that's the most important thing, Simran. People should understand what are the downsides, what are the risks of any information of this kind going out, and what are they supposed to do. So typical do's and don'ts with regard to UPSI insider trading is something that should be publicized within the organization to a great extent, along with trainings or awareness sessions on what is what and what they need to do, and more importantly, what they don't need to do.
Thanks. That was very insightful. And I guess organizations have to follow it in letter and in spirit. That takes me to the last question. How can boards ensure PIT compliance is more than just a checkbox exercise?
See, the regulator has cast a lot of responsibility on the boards, right, along with the compliance officers on ensuring compliance with the regulation, because this regulation itself is there to ensure fair market conduct, right? To make our capital markets conducive for investments to happen. People will feel more secured and investments will come in. So I think from that perspective, the boards will, there are guiding lights, right, with regard to a corporate. So I think setting the tone at the top, zero tolerance culture towards non-compliance, all of this, and then seeing to it that the processes, etc., all are in place, the internal controls mechanism, like what the regulator asks us to do as per the regulation, is in place. People are made aware, all of that is there. That will probably help in reducing the non-compliances that are happening. In fact, we've seen that SEBI has kind of, the investigations that it's doing, that percentage has risen, in 25 from 24, 60% plus surge is happening. That's quite a number. So here I think we really, the boards need to come up and take up and share this responsibility to see that UPSI entries are made in time, window closures are done in time. The exceptions need to be vouched for. Are there NDAs in place? Now, I'm not saying that the board needs to sit down and get into all these operational formalities, but I'm sure some kind of an update needs to go on insider trading and its compliances to the board for their views and their comments. I believe when this is actively measured at board levels, execution definitely follows, and that's the way we can kind of tune in with the regulator and make our capital markets a fantastic place to be in.
Thanks. That was really insightful, Meenakshi. Thank you so much for joining us today and breaking it all down so clearly and succinctly. And that's a wrap for today's episode. We explored SEBI's prohibition of insider trading. From headline cases to practical safeguards, it's clear that prevention is now the priority for boards and compliance teams. We'll be back soon with more expert conversations on governance, markets, and policy. Until then, thanks for tuning in and stay ahead of the curve.